The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Today we have this great writer. I've been watching his stuff for a while. The newest book is called Working Class Hero, and it's the autobiography of a superhuman. And the author is James Robert Smith. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
No trouble. I'm glad to do it.
Well, so Bob, let's talk about your writing. This is a really interesting concept. This book I was looking at. Where do you get your ideas for writing? It's kind of sci-fi, I guess you would call it.
Yeah. Well, the idea for this came from just an entire lifetime of being surrounded by comic books. My parents owned used bookstores. They opened the first one in 1965, and my dad used to buy comic books for 2 cents a piece, or he would trade them 2 for 1. And you got to understand, this was 1965, and the comic books just poured into the store, first by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Within 6 months, he had like 150,000 comic books. He didn't know what to do with them all. I think by the end of the first year, he had 250,000 comic books. So he had to rent a warehouse across the street from his store in Atlanta. And he hired college students to go in and sort them alphabetically, or sometimes alphabetically, sometimes in types of comics. So, I lived the life, dream life of a comic book fan. And you have to, in 1965, a comic book from the 1940s wasn't that unusual for my dad to run across. So I got to read, anything and everything you can imagine that most people just dream about getting their hands on.
Wow.
So Working Class Hero came out of the Silver Age comics that I enjoyed so much when I was a kid, mainly from Marvel Comics. All the stuff created and written by, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. And that's kind of the atmosphere I was trying to recreate in that first Working Class Hero novel.
So do you make it sound like if I'm reading Working Class Hero, do I feel like I'm reading it like a cartoon, I don't want to say it that way, like a comic book? Does it have that sort of feel?
Yeah, I think, that's what I was shooting for. You have your, not really an origin story, because all the heroes in my book have the same origin. It's a virus that they get. As an adult, they're not born with it. You get this virus, and it, transforms you. Different people it affects differently. And, but you have all of these different superheroes. There aren't very many of them, that they're not like all over the place. It's a very rare malady. But I tried to get in all of the tropes that you get with, Silver Age comic books.
So what do your superheroes do? Like what's their what kind of things do you have them able to do?
Well, they're everything you can imagine from from that period of comic book superheroes. But when you contract the virus and it affects you and turns you into a superhuman, you're supposed to immediately contact the government. And the minute you do, they come and get you. And you're not given a choice at all. You're under government sanction at that point, and they tell you what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And they try to collect up the heroes into different groups in different regions of the country. And the people who don't do this, the heroes who don't cooperate, they go underground and essentially become hunted. So they're villains of one type or another, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so that's where you get the conflict that I set up. But then I added in another conflict in the book where these superhumans show up who aren't or don't seem to be people who were, afflicted by the virus. And they end up being either actually, you never find out, of course, I'm going to leave it open, and but they seem to be gods. So then we have the conflict between the heroes and these people purporting to be gods.
Yeah, I see. You say Roman gods.
Right, the Roman gods. Yeah.
Wow. So does it read, like, do you have an underlying theme as well? Like, because in a lot of the old comic books, as in, like, these superheroes, it's always good versus evil and things like that. Is it sort of the same feel to it?
It's not really so much good versus evil, but it's... And this will build up as I come out with more novels because I wrote it as a series, and the next one should be out pretty soon. And but the theme is your average person versus authority, which everybody has to deal with. I mean, no matter what you are in life, you have to deal with authority, and that's the tension in the book, and that was the message that I want to carry through the entire series, is how people deal with authority. Because these superheroes in the book, they're powerful, they're scary individuals, but the military is more powerful than they are, and they have to watch what they do, and they have to toe the line just like we do. So that's the theme I was hunting for with the concept of the book, and then going forward with the next one, which I'm hoping will be out in about 2 months.
So are you making the how do I say this now? So do you think, so is authority kind of a scary or bad figure in your
Not
series?
necessarily. It's just, how, especially these people, how do they deal with authority when they're bursting with abilities and powers that most people don't have at their beck and call, but they still have to do what they're told to do, just like we do. But it's not necessarily, it's just harder for them, let's put it that way. If you can pick up a 30-ton bulldozer and toss it across, a football field, how likely are you to do what you're told to do? You're probably going to do it, but it's going to be more difficult, let's say. So that was one of the general ideas that I was trying to wield as I told the story, how these people deal with authority.
That should do well, I think, in these times. So now your characters, the actual superheroes, the working class heroes and stuff, how do you develop them, and where do they come from? Are they from people you know, from family, from people you...
Well, yeah, they're people I know, and, people I've met, people I've known. I pulled physical attributes and personality attributes from different people, and since I've been a working class person my whole life, I don't have a college education, I don't have any marketable skills of being a writer. I've been a laborer all my life, and so that's another thrust of the book. All of these people generally are from the working class. They're dock workers and truck drivers and ditch diggers and grocery store clerks and waiters and waitresses. And that's where they all came from. So that was, that's another strong aspect of the book that I wanted to accentuate and will going forward. Even the villains are like that, they're just before they contracted the virus, they're just average Joes.
Oh, so in a way, you've put yourself into all of the characters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, probably part of the influence of writing these characters was the same thing that was going through whenever you read what influenced Robert E. Howard when he was creating all of the weird characters he created. Conan and Bran McMorn and Cormac McCarthy and all of his Western characters, his detectives. They're just people that he knew and people like himself. So I think that, that was a big influence on me. I used the same reason for writing as guys, these pulp writer like Robert E. Howard did.
So, I have to say, so if you go out to a store, a grocery store, and you run across some rude person or something like that, do you take that character and kill them?
Not really. I mean, that's another point that's taken in the book is, they can't do that. They can't do it. I mean, they will immediately find themselves behind the nuclear 8-ball or whatever it takes to put them down if they step out of line in that way. So no, they're not going to. But of course they're not, once that happens to them, they're no longer, they're no longer ditch diggers. They're no longer grocery store cashiers, etc. They from that moment forward, they work for Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam gives them something to do, pays them handsomely to keep them doing what needs to be done per the government. And the government is not a bad guy. I'm not saying, that's not what I'm setting up in the books whatsoever. It's just the fact of having to deal with authority. And in this case, the authority comes from the same place we find authority in our government.
Yeah, that could lead to a lot of different avenues in the future, like through
absolutely.
the book.
I've got it. I've got outlines going because here's what happened at the time I created the concept. I was with a small publisher, and I was really hot to write the book, and I wrote part of it and showed him what I'd written, and he said, "Yeah, let's go with this." And I said, "I want to do this as a series," and he said, "Yeah, sure, that's great. We'll do it as a series." And so I wrote the first book, and fastest I've ever written anything. I think I wrote it in about 8 weeks, something like that. Almost.
Wow.
It's a very pulpish narrative, and I wrote it at a pulp speed, because I used to know some of the old pulp writers, and they could churn out a novel, and, good grief, some of them, well, there's the old story of Lester Dent. He could write a 60,000-word Doc Savage novel between Friday afternoon and Monday morning, but it wasn't that fast. But a lot of I did know several pulp writers, and it wasn't anything for them to write a novel in 4 or 5 weeks. So it was that kind of fever that I wrote that book in. And I got it to the publisher, and he published it, and it did fairly well, but it didn't do well. When I was ready I was already well into the second one, he had changed his mind. He didn't want to do it anymore. So since he had the rights to the first one, I didn't want to shop the second one. Well, basically, I couldn't shop the second one around because no publisher would want the second one without the first one, and he wouldn't give me the rights back. So there it languished. I wasn't going to go to all that effort when he had the rights to the first book and wouldn't return them. And but finally he did. which was several months ago, and I just went ahead and published it myself, which I always swore I would never do that. I'm not into the whole self-publishing thing. It just, I was about as anti-self-publishing as a person can be, but got the rights back. I said, I don't want to run into another situation like I just suffered. So went ahead and published it myself, and did much better with me doing it than under a micro publisher imprint. So I'll do the second one myself also, and then the third, and hopefully I'll just keep doing them.
So how do you feel about the way the publishing world's changed? Does it sort of, do you think it's a good thing, or do you think
self-publishing? I still don't like self-publishing. I don't like it personally because I love to write, but I'm not a salesperson. I'm just not a salesperson. Like one time on my blog, I put a picture of DeForest Kelley as Bones, and I titled it, "I'm a writer, not a salesman, damn it." Because and that's true. I'm just not a salesperson. I've never done that really. It doesn't appeal to me. I'm not someone who likes to sit in the middle of the room and scream me. I just don't like doing that. But if I'm going to self-publish, I've got to do it to a certain extent. But it's not something that appeals to me. So I wish I had a good publisher, who would handle all of that. Like, I've been published by some of the larger houses, and they do all that. So that was better for me. But it's hard to do that anymore because the publishing business isn't what it used to be. I call it the tail end of the old model, and it doesn't exist anymore. Not for me anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of writers feel that way. I don't think you're alone. No. I think that's just how it's changing, and a lot of writers are not promoters. Even myself, you can't. It's hard to do the job properly if you're focused on your writing and your life and things like that, right? So,
I realize there are some guys out there who are really I do know I have a friend who's a writer who's really good at self-promotion, and but I think it just comes naturally to those people, and it's not for me. I just have a hard time handling that aspect of it.
Yeah.
I can write good copy. But I don't. I find it distasteful to have to go out and be a carnival barker, essentially. so I've avoided it.
Yeah. Well, I don't blame you. I agree totally. It's it doesn't feel natural. It seems superficial.
Right.
And something about it doesn't work. But some people can do it. You're right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's guys out there who are selling, good God, hundreds of thousands of copies every few months of their books, and they're doing it on the basis of getting out there and squeezing the flesh and shaking hands and talking to people and organizing events, and it's just not something I'm maybe I would be good at it if I put the effort into it, but it doesn't. It makes me feel uncomfortable. But some people are good at it.
Well, things are tougher now too with the virus and everything that's been going on the last year, and I don't see it changing a whole lot this year anyway.
No, it's going to be. It's probably going to be just as bad this year as it was last year, if not worse, because more people are dying from it now.
Yeah. It makes it harder. So I don't see it opening up a whole lot either.
See, one thing I miss, I used to enjoy doing signing events. When I was with traditional publishers, they would call up the stores and arrange for me to do appearances, and that was all out of my hands. That was great, and all I had to do was show up, and the stores would order X number of copies, and they'd sell the books, and I would sign them and jibber jabber with the fans, and it was wonderful. But I can't do that anymore, especially with the virus. You can't. There's not that opportunity. I mean, and that's just part of it.
Yeah. I mean, it will come around. Hopefully.
Oh yeah. Maybe in next year, in 2022, there'll be open science fiction conventions and comic conventions and things of that nature, where and the bookstores will be having larger events without social distancing, et cetera. We'll see.
So I'm not sure. Are you one of those guys that likes to go to those Comic Cons and sci-fi events like Star Trek things and stuff like that, or do you not like those either?
I like comic conventions. I enjoy comic conventions. I don't enjoy science fiction conventions too much, and there's a big difference. And when I say science fiction conventions, I mean whatever genre of book it is. I don't enjoy those as much, because you have, I think it's at those you have a higher ratio of professional to fan base. There's a lot of writers and fewer fans, but you go to a comic convention, it's a amount of professionals and an enormous amount of fans. So you really get to meet the people who like to, either read the things you've written or read the type of thing you've written, and then they'll see it and pick it up, or at least talk to you about it. Because I love talking to people at these events. I really, really miss that.
Hopefully it comes back. What's the comic world like now? The comic book world, as compared to how it was in the 60s and 70s, and even right through the 90s.
See, the comics. See, I don't know how old you. How old are you? Are you? I'm 60.
I'll be 59.
Okay, well, you're roughly the same period as I was when we were kids. There were just tremendous types of comic books. Well, first of all, comic books were written for children. They were not written for, emotionally stunted adults. They were written for little kids. And comic books were everywhere. I mean, you go into the drugstore, there were comic books. You go into a grocery store, there were comic books. You go, into a newsstand, there were comic books. There's not even any newsstands anymore for that matter. But they were everywhere, and they were pervasive. They were exceedingly popular. They were relatively inexpensive, even for the time period. They were not expensive. Most parents didn't have a problem with giving a kid a dime or 12 cents or later 15 cents for a comic book. So, but the main thing was there was every kind of comic book you could, think of something, and there was a comic book for it. There were comic books based on movies. There were comic books about horses. There were comic books about dogs. There were comic books about policemen. Superheroes were just a tiny little fraction of what comic books were about. And starting in the 1960s, superheroes took over the comic book marketplace. And it's almost like the publishers just threw up their hands and said, okay, well, we're going to forget all of these other types of comics that made the industry and focus on this one thing that's selling like crazy. So it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy to make comic books to the point where when people think of the word comic book, they immediately think of Spider-Man or Fantastic Four or Batman or whatever. That's all they think of now, is superheroes. And they've forgotten that comic books, used to be Casper the Ghost or, Little Dot or Classics Illustrated or Turok Son of Stone. There were comic books for every kind of kid, every little girl and every little boy. There was comic books that appealed to what they liked, and that's all gone now. It's just, first of all, there's very few comic books done for children. There are very few. So, like I said, it's all done for adults who go into the comic book stores, and you can't find comic books anywhere else. They're not out there. You can't go into the drugstore, and you don't see them propped up next to the checkout counter at the grocery store. There's only one place to go get comics, and let's face it, some of the places are kind of creepy.
Yeah. Well, actually, the show House of Mystery I named after a comic.
Right.
And
see, again, a mystery comic. You know, mystery comic. There were ghost comics. There were horror comics, science fiction comics, spaceship comics. There was everything.
Dark Shadows.
Dark Shadows had a comic book. I mean, there was no limit. Hot Rod comics. There were comics like there was no subject off limits to comic books for a little kid. If they wanted a comic book about something, they could find it.
Yeah. Well, did you like the idea of all these superhero movies and stuff, Marvel making the big screen?
Yeah, it's good. I've gotten kind of jaded for them. I don't go see them anymore because they've reached a saturation point for me. Obviously not for the general public because they're still making tons and tons of money. But I don't go see them like I used to. My son and I, that's one thing we always do is go see movies together. And, we both feel like it's just reached a point of saturation.
Too much.
Yeah, I do like that TV series, The Boys, so I get a kick out of that. That's on Amazon Prime. So I do watch that. Well, it doesn't take long to watch it because it has an 8-episode season.
Yeah.
In just a few days, you've seen them all, and you have to wait another year for them to come out. But like the Avengers movies, I've not seen all those, and probably won't. I just get bored with it after a while.
Yeah, becomes too much of a formula. You know? It's kind of that's how I feel too. I'm take it or leave it. If I see one on the movie channel, I'll watch it, but I'm certainly not looking for them, and which is too bad.
Right.
It's too bad when it goes that way.
Yeah, and then I used to, I was heavily involved in the retail aspect. I even wrote for the comic industry because that was a lifelong obsession. Was as soon as I could, I wanted to break into writing comics, and finally got my foot in the door at Marvel. And then the editor that I had there, who liked my work, left Marvel. So when that happens, you have to start over because your editor is kind of like your champion. And when he left, I had no champion there anymore, and I never could reestablish a connection. And eventually, I continued to write comics, but for smaller companies, and never got to the point I wanted to be at. So, but it did get my foot in the door. I can say I was published by Marvel Comics.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that was fun. And and the money was good for while it lasted, and I missed that to a certain extent. But it's just a complete, again, that has changed totally. I mean, I could go to New York City and meet with editors or even go to the offices, and that doesn't even exist anymore. It's gone. They rolled all that up and moved it into an office in Warner Brothers or whatever. I guess Warner Brothers. No, Disney in California. So that's where their offices are now. And, all the old pros I knew from those days, they're all either retired or dead. And then a lot of the editors, they're not involved in comics anymore. They're doing other things. So it's just completely, I wouldn't even know where to begin if I wanted to. And so that's why, that's one reason I write working class hero books, because, I keep my hand in and get a kick out of it. I really like writing that story. And I hope to be doing it for a while, because I've got several of them plotted out. And like I said, the second one should have been out a long time ago, but I put the skids on it because, who was going to, I still had hopes of finding a publisher, but who was going to publish part 2 when part 1 was owned by a different company?
Yeah.
So I had to stop work on it, and that was when I took that time to finish The Emissary, which is a horror novel. And now that I've got the rights back to Working Class Hero, I'm trying to finish the second one, which shouldn't be too long.
When you get into the horror and you write that, do you like old classic horror, or do you like the modern stuff?
It depends on how far back you go to say old.
That's true.
I like the type of stuff that has come out since, guys like Stephen King and Carl Edward Wagner and that lot. That's more attuned to what I enjoy reading. But I like old stuff too. But it's hard to find horror that is actually frightening. I read a lot of it. I'm not going to say who or what, but a lot of what I read is it's decent writing. It's mechanically good writing, but it doesn't scare me. I can't tell you when the last time a horror novel scared me. So. But
do you think that's because
I'm probably jaded. Yeah.
Well, once you've been through it, like, if you're watching or reading something from the 60s and after you've been through so much, and seen and read so much, I would think that would sort of, so things don't surprise you as much. They don't.
Right. But every once in a while, like I read a Fritz Leiber short story not too long ago, and he wrote it, I guess, back in the 50s. And, boy, it was scary. It was genuinely unsettling and creepy. So even old stuff can surprise you if you've not run across it. And I had never read that story. I was like, oh gosh, that's pretty darn good story. So you never know what you're going to encounter.
More of the mental horror than.
Yeah, that. But to me, a horror story is not complete if you don't feel some kind of physical dread. If it's all, on a mental or spiritual level, it might not be as effective. You have to feel some physical dread, to me, for it to be effective.
Right. That makes sense.
When we were assembling, Hippocampus Press published a collection of my short stories, A Confederacy of Horrors. And when I was assembling the stories for them to include, I was surprised how many ghost stories I had written. I had never thought about it before. And then I really, I've always found ghosts to be particularly creepy. And so a good ghost story actually, can actually scare me. Monsters generally don't in monster stories, but if there's a supernatural metaphysical aspect to a story, if the author knows how to handle it right, yeah, those are scary.
Is it because you have a sense of real with ghosts? Do you have like a spirit sort of thing that you?
Well, I have a sense.
It gives you
actually
fear?
it's a sense of the unreal. It's the unreal part that is frightening, because I don't believe in ghosts. I just don't believe in them, which I know is ironic that it would be my favorite type of horror fiction, but it's my disbelief in them that makes a well-written horror story ghost story effective because the writer is making me suspend, my disbelief for a second and thinking what it would be like if that damn thing was real. And
yeah, I guess I never thought of it that way. I always thought it would be something, you're not scared of monsters because, they're just not real. But,
right.
But ghosts, if you don't think they're real, then it wouldn't scare you. I would think that would have the opposite effect, but that's...
Right. Well,
wow.
It was like my first big novel, first novel that I sold to an actual, a big publishing house was based on the premise of cryptozoology, animals that exist that nobody knows about. And in this case, they were giant predatory birds. And so when I wrote the novel, the first thing I had to do, okay, this is a cool animal to put in a horror novel or a suspense novel. When I was first marketing it, I called it an ecological suspense novel. And when I was pitching it to different publishers, and but I had to come, how can there be an 8-foot tall, predatory, flightless ground bird walking around in Florida and no one has seen it? It's like Bigfoot. How can there be an 8-foot tall ape cruising around in the forests of North America and no one's ever seen one? It's impossible. So you have to come up with reasons why this could actually exist. And so that's what I did. I sat down and tried to figure out how can this thing exist and no one's seen it. Or when I say thing, there's lots of them because you have to have a breeding population. And so that's what I did, and that's what people liked about it when it came out. It was, it was well received because there was a sense of logic behind why this thing could be out there and doing its thing and eventually killing people. So that's what I look to. That's what I look to do. And when when I sit down to write, I try to. When it's something like that, that's horror oriented, you have, even with illogic, you have to build a mythology that makes some sense. You have to build logic where there's not logic.
And that's your book, The Flock, that you're talking about,
That's
right?
The Flock, yeah. That was the one that Warner Brothers optioned. That's a funny story. I was online, and I'm not known for diplomacy or tact. And I was on the bulletin board, and whose was it? Eddie Campbell, who was the artist on Alan Moore's book From Hell about Jack the Ripper. I was on his bulletin board, and we were discussing the movie, and there were parts of that movie that I did not like, and I mentioned the parts, and I think I said those scenes were a piece of crap or something like that, and I didn't know the movie producer was online, that he was one of the people I was talking to. So he got angry, that I had disparaged his movie, and I hadn't disparaged the entire movie, just these particular scenes. And so he got real upset, and what happened was he went out and he bought a copy of The Flock so that he could rake me over the coals authoritatively. He was going to pick out every flaw he could find and give me a hard time about it online. And instead of that, he ended up loving the book and bought the rights. Well, he didn't buy the rights. He optioned the rights from me. Right. So that was a hilarious story in and of itself.
Well, maybe that's how you should be marketing yourself. You should find people and put down their work.
Yeah,
and when they go to get you back.
If I ever met, Spielberg, I'd say, "You suck, Spielberg," with the hope that the same thing would repeat itself. But it was, it was just a funny story, and I've had other people interested in other projects, but that's the furthest along any my work has ever come to actually making it into a movie, and it came close.
But someone like you, okay, so working class guy, just
Yeah.
like all of us really
Right.
here. How did you gain confidence to actually think that you would be able to be published and write? Like, where does that come from?
Just stubbornness,
Okay.
I just started writing, just stubborn, okay? I started writing stories when I was 8 years old, and, they were just little goofy little kid stories, and I just kept at it and wrote little short novels, and whatever period I was cruising through as a kid. Like, I think my first story I ever wrote was probably a Godzilla story, and then a Dr. Dolittle story, et cetera, et cetera. And when I got into high school, I was writing stories about animals, and then when I first got married, I said, okay, I got to quit playing around and get serious. And and I did. I got serious. I sat down and figured out what kind of stories did I like to read, and I'll try to write those kind of stories. And what was it? I started to pick those stories apart. How was it? How did the writer do that? I'm going to see if I can I never imitated anyone. I don't, I write in a kind of a matter-of-fact style. So I wasn't imitating, H.P. Lovecraft or Ray Bradbury or Joe Lansdale or anything like that, which is what a lot of people do, and they fall into a trap doing that. But I just wanted to pick apart what they were doing, not how they were doing it. And after a little while, I started to, you start small. You sell the little semi-pro-zines for a penny or two a word, and I just moved up the ladder until I was selling stories to respectable marketplaces. Sold story to Weird Tales and places like that. Started out with Mark Rainey's Death Realm magazine. Sold several stories to him, and just kept going. And then when I got enough confidence, not just writing but selling short stories, then I started to write novels. And wrote on it. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what The Flock was. I think it was my third novel before I sold one. And see, this was back in the days when there was no self-publishing. It just, self-publishing was for the biggest losers, because it cost a lot of money to, you got to go out and pay $5,000 or $10,000 to publish, not even that many copies of a book. It wasn't easy to do. And then trying to sell those, how were you going to distribute those books? It was just, I use that term because most of the professional writers I knew in those days said self-publishing is for schmucks and losers. Don't even think about it. And that was the days before the internet made it easy to self-publish.
Yeah. But there is still, it has opened it up for a lot of those losers. Absolutely. There's some really bad stuff out.
Yeah. I mean, one reason I hated and lobbied against self-publishing for so long was I kept reading it and I couldn't read any of it. It was awful, and it took me about 3 years before I finally found a self-published book that was readable. So, that was, it really soured me to the concept of self-publishing because so much, almost all of it is horrible. It's just awful. Just the worst of the worst. It's the stuff that used to come across the slush pile in publishers that, you discouraged that person or told them what they were doing wrong or something of that nature, and you never heard from them again. Well, that's not the case now. Everybody hears. I forget how many books are self-published now on, all of these platforms, especially Amazon. How many self-published books do they publish every year? It's insane.
Yeah.
Somebody told me it's in the millions, I guess.
Yeah.
Worldwide. It's so. How do you again? How do you fight through that flood of self-published dreck when you have a decent book? It's very hard to do.
It's terrible. It's yeah.
I used to be friends with the writer Billy Sue Mosselman, who passed away a few years ago, and she was a widely published writer, very respected, had a good career as a mid-list writer, and for some reason she decided she would self-publish some stuff, and she did great. I mean, she was making decent money by self-publishing, and but then the market got flooded, and she saw her sales just plummet. I mean, they went to nothing. She would publish a book and make $20,000-$30,000 off the book, and then a couple of years later, she would publish one of her books, and nobody was buying them. She couldn't make $200 off of them.
Yeah.
And it was because the market was diluted. It was just completely diluted. There was just so many thousands of titles coming out every month. And how do you distinguish your books from that other stuff? And it's a puzzle. How do you do it?
It's tough.
I was lucky with Working Class Hero. For some reason, I can sell enough copies to make doing another one, hopefully a profitable proposition, and a third one and a fourth one, because, that was one thing I wanted to do. I wanted it to be like a comic book, a periodical. Comic book came out every month, and I don't want to come out with a book every month. It's, I'm not Lester Dent, but but I do want to come out with one or two a year, and I have fun writing them. I just had, I had so much fun writing the first one, and I'm having a blast writing the second one, and I'm going to have a good time writing the third one, which is already plotted. So, that was, I want to be able to do that. So,
yeah.
I did get lucky with promoting that first book, so hopefully I can do it again.
Yeah, do you have a website or a blog or something set up where people can come find you?
I did have a James Robert Smith website, but it was just, I wasn't generating any interest that way. It was just like there, and there was no feedback from it. So I do have a blog called Till the Last Hemlock Dies, which covers, all of my interests, photography, backpacking, kayaking, hiking, wildlife photography, writing. So I do that. And,
okay.
But I don't have
that up.
Yeah, Till the Last Hemlock Dies and it's on Blogger. It's on Blogspot. But I don't, because of Facebook, I don't pay as much attention to the blog as I used to, because I can communicate with people on Facebook, really easy. Whereas your blog is hit or miss. I'll check how many hits a day it gets, and I had one blog post, and the hits just went through the ceiling. It was like 15,000 hits. I was like, where the heck did that come from? I couldn't figure it out, because it was just a typical blog post. To me, it was not even a particularly, it was just average to me. I couldn't figure out. It was some movie reviews I'd done. And I was like, why did that thing hit 15,000 hits? So I read it line by line to see what was there, and I had written a comedy little sentence. And it said, in one of the pieces, in the sentence was, Jennifer Connelly naked. Nekkid. And it was just a toss-off joke, but the internet search picked up Jennifer Connelly naked, and 15,000, schlubs linked onto my website thinking they were going to see a naked photograph of Jennifer Connelly. Oh my God!
Well, now you know how to do it. That's how you promote the books.
Yeah.
There you go. You just got to put that in your wording.
Yeah, I'll just slap that in there and get 15,000 hits in a day.
Yeah, then everybody be coming seeing your book looking for a naked woman, and it's not exactly. But at least you get the exposure, right? It's like
I should like put the first line in bold. Connelly naked.
That might be a good idea. I might steal that from you. There, I'll get on that. No, it's interesting. Yeah, you don't know what people are going to do, and it's kind of crazy. It's kind of a free for all, really. Just gambling. Certainly, has this coronavirus and all this stuff sort of affected your writing? Do you find that you can't write, or you slows you down, or?
I could write, but actually my production has fallen off because, I can't go and see. Normally, I'm very active. I'm very, very active. I'm constantly doing something outside of. I'm on a trail backpacking somewhere and sleeping in my tent on the Appalachian. Well, I don't like the Appalachian Trail, but an Appalachian Trail type of situation. I'll be in a national park or wilderness area, or I'll just be hiking. I'll go somewhere and climb a mountain and or go kayaking. I'm constantly busy, physically busy, and the coronavirus has made that difficult. For a while you couldn't even do that. They shut down the national forest and the parks. I couldn't even go hiking, and that's loosened up somewhat. But I'm not getting as much activity as I should. So I exercise around the house a lot in the neighborhood. I can still do 1 mile walks around the neighborhood. So I think maybe just being depressed from not being able to do the things outside has cut down on my production. I still write every day, but not as much as I used to. I don't get the word production that I used to get.
A lot of people feel that way. You're not alone. I think there's, we come across that a lot.
Oh yeah. I talk to people who do suicide prevention. I got friends who are into that, and they said, this is a busy time for them. They get lots of phone calls, and they have to work with a lot of people, and I'd imagine.
Well,
yeah.
Well, I was just going to say it's our time on the show is running out, but it's been a real pleasure. And now we've been talking about Working Class Hero, and we've had James Robert Smith, author, on. Thank you for being on the show.
I appreciate you calling and giving me the opportunity.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.